Okay, to another pressing issue of this time and of recent times gone by. With Islamic State suffering heavy losses in Syria and Iraq, many children are being left behind as their parents die fighting for the terrorists. RT has been filming children who've arrived at an orphanage in Iraq, and the youngsters were fully aware of the cause their relatives were fighting for.
بابا شاهد. ماما استشهادية. أفطماتي وباب. ماما وباب استشهادية.
كيف؟
أفغانستان شاهد. أفغانستان.
قل له كيف توفى أبوك وأمك؟
تنفرد.
ماما وين؟
طيار شاهد oldu.
Nasıl ses? Sigarayla.
Yandı. Tank vuruldu, yandı.
جدو؟
جدو آيات خان.
Yeah, and it's not just Azerbaijan, of course. You've got children returning to a lot of other countries in Europe and further afield. To discuss this further, I'm happy to say we're joined live by Salman Butt, Muslim rights campaigner and chief editor at Islam 21C, and Toni Bugle, founder and leader of Mothers Against Radical Islam and Sharia. Both very welcome to the programme. Salman, can we just start with you? Should the rehabilitation of these orphans not at least start where they are now? For instance, we saw in Iraq there, give them resources, send specialists there, instead of perhaps relying on teachers in schools or other in their original countries to somehow rehabilitate them there?
Well, I think the more important thing is that these children get the psychological and psychiatric help that they need and they deserve. These children have been suffering what we call multi-generational trauma, with the trauma of the fathers, grandfathers going back 30 to 40 years. You know, in my lifetime, for example, Iraq as a country has seen more suffering and conflict than it has seen peace.
Toni, some of these children, as we've just been looking before we started speaking to you, they really are so young, regardless of where they're born or have lived. They pose little or no risk. Does the opposite argument apply? Get them home as soon as possible before further damage is inflicted on them in those war-stricken regions?
I think, depending obviously on the age of the children, I think that these children, what they need more than anything else is love. They need to be taught how to love again, because I should imagine that that's something that they know very little about, really. It's no good being loved with somebody who wants to go out and has taught you that killing is normal. I don't think that I think that at the end of the day, one thing we don't need is Western intervention. I think that we need to stay out of it and let the people of the country where they are do what needs to be done to protect those children and to make sure that each and every one of them is taught to love, taught to trust again, taught right from wrong. These, from what I can hear in the background, are very, very young children. They're not too late to save, in my opinion. But if we're talking 14, 15, 16, then personally I don't know how you can de-radicalise that. In fact, I don't believe that you can.
Salman, there are many potential hurdles, as Toni was alluding to there, for rehabilitation, not least financing, I suppose, and who's going to take responsibility when they come back to the countries?
Well, I think we have a moral obligation and a duty now to help fix the damage, the lasting damage and the legacy of our intervention and that of previous governments claiming to be acting on our behalf. I'm glad to say, most people I think now won't in the Western world justify the horrific Iraq wars and the so-called genocidal sanctions put on Iraq as per top UN diplomats in the 1990s, as they called it. But the apologies aren't enough. We have to try and fix the mess we've created in an evidence-based, in a moderate way, not with bullets, bombs, and carpet bombing, and drone strikes, and so on and so forth. We need, as Toni said, and I agree, we need to give them love. We need to teach them, how to love again.
I suppose, Toni, that aspect, finding a family for the children, would be a good start in securing a solid foundation, a good future for them.
And I don't know whether it necessarily has to be a family as such. Right now, what they do, it doesn't matter who gives them the love songs, they get that love. I would say, though, that I don't think that we can, straight away go, Western intervention is to blame for this, ISIS is to blame for this, extremism is to blame for this. The parents who were extreme in their beliefs are to blame for this. This isn't, I didn't radicalise these children. I didn't teach these children that their parents were martyrs. That isn't my doing, and that isn't Western intervention doing. That was the doing of those who were extreme.
According to the vast majority of
extreme manner.
Empirical studies, it is Western intervention that was the catalyst for all of this.
Well, the West are always to blame, aren't they?
Well, no, just when we happen to decimate an entire country, we have a moral responsibility to pick up the pieces and at least help the innocent people.
I don't think it is our responsibility. Look, these children. Look, I will grant you that innocent children like this, who did not ask to be involved in this, they did not ask to be involved in any kind of extreme behaviour. They certainly do need a lot of love, and they need to be taught right from wrong and raised in a manner. And I don't really think it matters who gives them that love. I don't think it has to be particularly Islamic communities. It could be a Christian family. I don't think it matters so long as a child is loved. So I don't really see how that's relevant. But to this constant to-ing and fro, foreign policy, let's blame it onto foreign policy, it's almost like you're not willing to take responsibility within your own communities for the fact there is radicalisation
I am
going
taking
on.
responsibility. That's why I said we need to. That's why we need to right our own wrongs.
You're saying we need
our
to.
Own.
You're talking about.
Yeah, I'm saying our own foreign policy, which we can't just bury our heads in the sand, I mean,
and we can't keep blaming foreign policy.
At the lurch of, look at the effect just an imaginary threat, of immigration and a heightened threat of terrorism has done to.
It's not an imaginary threat, is it? I can't believe you brought this onto immigration.
I don't
think it's
leads to the rise of
imaginary.
EDL, leads to the rise of far right and so forth over here.
Oh my
if
days! I can't believe we're talking about children and you've brought in that.
Yes, Salman. Let me just bring up.
Seriously, do you mean like Manchester bombing when children?
Okay, Toni, one second.
Yeah.
Salman, because one of the things that we saw right before we went to you were clips of the children, and they went into the orphanage that RT was at. They knew all the words. They were really very au fait in what they were dealing with what they saw their parents doing. They knew what they wanted their parents to do. Can children like that actually be rehabilitated in a normal way, or is it going to be they're so extremely problematic that they're going to need a lot of help and a lot of time and a lot of specialist care?
This is the point of intergenerational trauma. If we look at the lasting effect on black communities today, of the slave trade even, of Jews after the Holocaust, of so many different types of suffering, it is inherited in a way to the subsequent generations, in things from just in a psychological way and even in an epigenetic way, that people are predisposed now to certain pathological types of behavior. So it has to be taken into consideration with a you know, as in a sympathetic, empathetic way.
Toni,
you know, that to take account of the
Toni,
suffering that these children and their
we are talking about two
forefathers have been through.
separate issues here, really, aren't we? The trauma of war and potential radicalism. Which do you feel should be dealt with first?
I think that the first thing you've got to deal with, it, in my opinion, is that we have to deal with the fact that radicalisation is happening all over the country. And one thing that, Salman, where you're very good to say, you know, Western intervention and the West are to blame, is what you're really saying, and the so-called rise of the far right and anybody who may or may not feel fear of radicalisation. It's almost as if you don't want to take any responsibility when it comes to the fact that you have the verses of the sword, strike the neck of the unbeliever, kill the unbeliever. This is what these children have been taught. Nose on the right, there's no good laughing. This is what children are taught. That's why these children have seen it. You want to take it back over hundreds and hundreds of years. It's got nothing to do with that. Well, you tell me, why are children taught? They're children. Why should any child be taught that? I tried to explain
to you a second ago. They're taught that because when a people are under threat of being wiped out, then the people who talk the toughest game, they rise to prominence in such a society. As I was about to explain, like here, when people think that immigrants are stealing their jobs, then anti-immigration far-right parties, you know, come to the fore and rally people around them. If people have been destroyed, if people's
you want to keep bringing this back to immigration, don't you? You really want to keep bringing this back to immigration.
Then the people who are talking about kill the Westerner, anti-US sentiment, those people are going to come to the fore. Those people are going to gain prominence because they're talking. They're
so what you're saying, in accordance to your rationale. In accordance to your rationale, Salman, what you're saying is the children of the Ariana Grande that were killed by a terrorist, extremist, radicalised Muslim, that what those parents should do, you couldn't blame them if they now came out and became violent, because they'd be justified in their actions. You cannot take what you see as being
what you're doing here is confusing
and not accept
the difference between
I will finish.
logical causation and a moral justification.
I didn't interrupt you. I listened.
I'm just trying to, because you're building a huge argument upon a shaky foundation here. I'm trying
You're the one who keeps bringing in immigration. I think that's very shaky ground. That's very shaky ground, isn't it?
There's a difference between
you're claiming
explaining
that
what happens and justifying it morally. Say that again?
No, I think you did just justify it, because you've just admitted children are being taught the verses of the sword. They are taught. We're talking babies.
Why?
Right? We're talking 1-year-olds.
Why?
I didn't teach them. Is it the why? Should you ask your community why those verses aren't removed? Maybe then you wouldn't have children being radicalised at all.
We're coming to the end of our time here, but I just want to get the thoughts of both of you. We've got about 30 seconds each. Just to try and conclude, Islamic State, OK, we know they're known for recruiting, training children from a young age. If ISIL is ever defeated, what is the best way to rehabilitate the likely thousands of children back into societies throughout Europe and other nations? Toni, to you first.
Well, depending on obviously where the children originate from, that's the first thing. If they're born in that country, then it's got to be those countries and their governments that take responsibility for paying out and getting those children the help they need. And quite frankly, I don't want to see any child. I don't care what child it is. I don't care whose child. I don't want to see any child radicalised. I don't want to see them growing up with that kind of hatred. I don't want to see any child go through that. And obviously we do need to do whatever we can do. But the moral compass is not only on the West. It just isn't.
Salman, we've got 20 seconds.
Well, for these children, we need to first help them and put them out of immediate danger, and then inculcate a strong sense of identity in them. As MI5 report in 2008 suggested and confirmed, a well-grounded Islamic identity, religious identity, is actually a firewall, a preventative measure to political violence.
They need less Islam, not more of it right now.
Okay,
they need less Islam, not more Islam.
Salman Butt, Muslim rights campaigner, chief editor at Islam 21C, and Toni Bugle, founder and leader of Mothers Against Radical Islam and Sharia. We thank you both for coming on the programme.
A wise sage.
And I'll be back in half an hour's time with more global news here at RT HQ.